My brother died in a car crash 15 years ago, a crash my father was driving. The silent, unspoken guilt destroyed our family. On the anniversary of his death, I bought a coffee for a sad old man to escape my own grief. A week later, he walked into my office with a secret about that crash, a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about that terrible day. Before we get into it, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that quiet cafe. For the last 15 years of my life, I have lived in a house of ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains or whisper in the night, but a quieter, more profound, and infinitely sadder kind. The ghost of my older brother, Owen, is in the empty space at the dinner table. The ghost of my father's laughter is in the heavy, oppressive silence that fills every room. And the ghost of the family we used to be is in the way my father and I now look at each other, like two strangers on opposite sides of a vast, unbridgeable chasm. The chasm had a name. It was called the accident. It happened on a Tuesday in October, 15 years ago today. My father, Martin, was driving my brother and me home from a soccer game. The rain was biblical, a torrential, blinding downpour that turned the highway into a river of black, slick glass. I was in the back seat. My brother, my hero, my best friend, Owen, was in the front. I remember the sudden, terrifying lurch of the car as it hydroplaned, the horrifying screech of metal on metal, and then a sudden, violent, and absolute silence. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. My father was in the bed next to me, his body broken but alive. My brother was gone. The official report said the other driver had run a red light, but it didn't matter. My father had been behind the wheel, and in his own mind and in the silent, unspoken space between us, the guilt was a life sentence, a prison he has never, ever been able to escape. We have not spoken of the accident or of my brother in 15 years. So today, on the anniversary, the silence in my own heart was a deafening roar. I couldn't bear the thought of my quiet, empty apartment. I couldn't bear the thought of facing my father. So during my lunch break from my job at the city archives, I fled to the one place in the city where I knew I could be completely and totally anonymous. A small, out-of-the-way coffee shop, a place of strangers. It was there that I saw him. He was an old man sitting alone in a corner booth, a single empty coffee cup in front of him. He was dressed in a simple but clean tweed coat, and his face was a ruin of a grief so profound, so absolute, that it felt like I was looking in a mirror. He was just staring out the window at the rain, his eyes, a clear, intelligent gray, full of a pain that was as deep and as familiar as my own. I watched as the waitress brought him his bill. I saw him reach into his pocket and pull out a small, worn coin purse. He emptied its contents onto the table, a small, sad pile of change, and he began to count, his old, trembling fingers fumbling with the coins. I saw his shoulders slump. He was short, a few dollars short, and the look of quiet, profound humiliation on his face was a thing I could not bear to witness. My heart, a thing I had thought was long since turned to stone, ached for him. I stood up and walked to the front counter, intersecting the waitress on her way to his table. "I'd like to pay my bill," I told her quietly, and the gentleman in the corner booth as well.
"Are you sure?" she whispered. "He's been in here for 3 hours just nursing that one cup of coffee." "I'm sure," I said. I paid for his coffee, and on a sudden, compassionate impulse, I added a warm, fresh slice of apple pie to his bill. "Just tell him it's a rainy day special from the management," I said. "And please, don't tell him it was me." I walked out of that small, warm coffee shop and back into the cold, gray afternoon, the quiet, anonymous act of kindness a small, flickering ember in my own chilly soul. I thought of the old man, of the profound and deeply familiar grief in his eyes. And then, as I always did, I pushed the feeling down, burying it under the weight of my own carefully managed emotional distance. It was a fleeting moment, I told myself, a brief intersection of two lonely strangers. I would never see him again. The week that followed was a carbon copy of the 1,000 weeks that had come before it. I went to work at the city archives, a place that was as quiet and as dusty as my own life. I spent my days in the silent, temperature-controlled solitude of the records room, carefully cataloging the lives of other people, the births, the marriages, the deaths, the stories of families that were not my own. It was a perfect job for a ghost, a man who was a living, breathing archive of a single, terrible memory. The anniversary of my brother Owen's death passed. I received the one obligatory and deeply awkward phone call from my father, Martin. It was the same as it was every year. "Isaac," he had said, his voice a strained, distant thing on the other end of the line. "Hi, Dad," I had replied. And then the silence, a vast, heavy, and suffocating silence, filled with the 15 years of unspoken words, of unshared grief, of the one terrible memory that stood between us like a thick, soundproof wall. The memory of the crash, the memory of him behind the wheel. "Well," he had finally said after what felt like an eternity, "just, calling to check in." "I'm fine, Dad," I had lied. "Good, that's good." And then he hung up. It was a week to the day after my visit to the coffee shop. I was at my desk in the main reading room of the archive, my head bowed over a stack of brittle 19th century census records, when my supervisor approached. "Isaac," she whispered, "there's a gentleman at the front desk. He's asking for you by name." I looked up, a feeling of pure and unadulterated confusion washing over me. I never had visitors. My life was a closed loop. Work, home, grocery store, repeat. No one even knew really what I did here. "Are you sure he's asking for me?" I asked. She was very specific, she said with a shrug. "An older gentleman and a tweed coat." My heart gave a strange, sudden lurch. I walked out of the quiet stacks and into the grand, echoing space of the main reading room. And there, standing by the front desk, looking completely and utterly out of place amongst the students and the historians, was him, the old man from the cafe. He saw me, and his face, which I had remembered to have been so full of a soft, defeated sadness, was now a mask of a new and deeply unsettling intensity. He walked towards me, his steps sure and steady. "Mr. Riley," he began, his voice a low, serious baritone that was a world away from the frail whisper I remembered. "Isaac Riley, thank you for seeing me. I believe we almost met last week at the coffee shop on Elm Street." I was completely and totally flustered. How did he find me? How did he even know my name? It was nothing, sir," I stammered. I hope you enjoyed the apple pie." He just looked at me, and his gaze was so intense it was almost a physical thing. "I am not here to repay you for a cup of coffee, son," he said, his voice now a low, grave, and deeply serious tone. "I am here because after you left, I asked a waitress your name. And I have spent the last 7 days," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "researching you, learning everything I can about you. Because I believe you and I are connected by a bond that is far more profound and far more tragic than a simple anonymous act of kindness." I just stared at him, a cold, creeping dread beginning to snake its way up my spine. This was not a friendly visit. This was something else. He reached into the pocket of his old tweed overcoat and pulled out a faded, yellowed newspaper clipping. He unfolded it carefully and slid it across the polished surface of the reading table towards me. "My son," he said, his voice now thick with a grief that was as fresh and as raw as my own, "was named Alex, and 15 years ago," he said, tapping a single, trembling finger on the photograph in the old news article, "he was in the other car." I looked down at the clipping. It was the article about the accident, the one that had destroyed my life.
And there, in the grainy black and white photograph, were the two smiling 17-year-old faces of the boys who had died that night. My brother, Owen, and the handsome, smiling boy I had never seen before, Alex, the other victim. And I looked up at the old, sad man standing in front of me, at the father of the other boy who had died in the same crash as my brother, the crash my own father had been driving in. The wall I had so carefully and so painfully built around that day, the wall that had been held in place by 15 years of a profound and suffocating silence, was about to be shattered. I I don't understand, I finally managed to whisper, my voice a dry, hoarse thing. Why are you here? Why are you showing me this? Mr. Thompson looked at me, and his eyes, which had been so full of a soft, gentle sadness in the cafe, were now burning with a new and deeply unsettling intensity. Because I have spent 15 long and empty years believing with every fiber of my being that your father was the man responsible for my son's death. I have hated him with a purity that has been the one constant and animating force in my life. He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. And I have spent the last 7 days, since I met you, entertaining a new and deeply terrifying possibility. The possibility that I may have been horribly, terribly, and unforgivably wrong. He told me his story then. He explained that for the last several years he had been coming to this very archive, a quiet amateur historian on a singular obsessive quest. He had been trying to piece together every single detail about the accident, to understand the why of his son's death. He had read every official police report, every newspaper article, every court filing from the civil suit that had followed. The official story, he said, his voice full of a new, bitter irony, is a simple one, a tragic accident, 2 cars on a rainy night, and one driver, your father, who lost control of his vehicle. But it wasn't the truth. The official reports, the ones the public saw, they were too neat, too clean. So I went deeper, into the undigitized raw evidence logs from the original investigating officer, into the boxes that no one has opened in 15 years. He reached into his tweed coat and pulled out another document, a photocopy of a page from a policeman's worn, handwritten notebook. He slid it across the table to me. I found this yesterday morning, he said. I looked down at the page. It was a series of rough, scribbled notes from the night of the accident. And there, in the margin, was a note that the officer had made. Third witness, a long-haul truck driver, name of Henderson, claims to have seen a dark-colored sedan with a broken driver's side taillight speed away from the scene immediately following the collision. Witness was never formally deposed. Captain requested we stick to the 2-car narrative, simpler for the report. I stared at the words, my heart hammering against my ribs. A 3rd car. A witness who was never called. A report that had been deliberately simplified. The full, ugly, and unforgivable truth of the situation began to dawn on me. My father, Martin, a man of modest means, had been the perfect scapegoat. He had been sacrificed, his reputation destroyed, his life ruined, to protect a powerful man from a more complicated and more expensive truth. I have spent 15 years hating the wrong man, Mr. Thompson said, his voice now full of a profound and deeply moving shame. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I cannot undo the damage that has been done, but I can find the truth. The name of that truck driver is the key, but the official records are sealed. I cannot access them. He then looked at me, his gaze full of a new, strange, and desperate hope. But you are an archivist. You work here. You have access to the deep, forgotten corners of this city's history, to the places a member of the public is not allowed to go. He leaned forward, his voice a quiet, powerful plea. I need your help, Isaac, he said. I need your help to find the full story. I need your help to find the name of that truck driver. I need your help to find the truth. for both our loved ones. I looked at him, at this man, this stranger, this man I should have considered my enemy. And I saw in his face the same desperate need for closure that had been a quiet, constant hum in my own heart for 15 long years. I had spent my entire adult life avoiding the truth of that night, hiding from its ghost. Now I was being invited to dive headfirst into the very heart of it. We were no longer two grieving strangers, separated by a shared tragedy. We were partners, and our first stop, I knew with the sudden, absolute certainty, had to be the one place I had been avoiding from my entire adult life. My father's silent, haunted house, to finally ask him to tell me his own long-buried version of the story. I walked out of the archives that afternoon, not into the familiar gray landscape of my own lonely life, but into a new and terrifyingly uncertain territory. The man beside me, Mr. Thompson, was no longer a stranger. He was my partner, my co-conspirator, a fellow archaeologist on a quest to excavate the single, buried truth that had defined both our lives for 15 long years. And our first and most difficult dig site was the one place on earth I had spent my life avoiding: my father's silent, haunted house. The drive there was a long, heavy silence. We were two men, bound by a shared, unspeakable grief, on our way to confront a third. I had called him from the road, my voice a strange, formal thing. "Dad, I'm coming over. There's someone I need you to meet." He had not argued. He had just, after a long, weary pause, said, "Okay, son." His house was the same as it had always been, a time capsule of a life that had ended 15 years ago. My brother Owen's sports trophies were still on the mantelpiece. My mother's old, faded paintings were still on the walls. And my father, Martin, was sitting in his usual armchair, a ghost in a house of ghosts. He looked up as we entered, and when he saw Mr. Thompson standing beside me, a flicker of something, confusion, fear, a dawning, horrified recognition crossed his face. He knew who this man was. In a small town, you always know. "Martin," Mr. Thompson began, his voice not accusatory, but a low, quiet rumble of a shared and profound sorrow. "My name is Arthur Thompson. My son was Alex." My father just nodded, his own face a mask of gray, stoic grief. I was the one who spoke. I laid the crumbled, photocopied page from the officer's notebook on the coffee table between them. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "we found this in the archives. It's a witness statement. From the night of the accident, a witness who was never called, a witness who saw a third car." I watched my father's face as he read the words. I watched as 15 years of a self-imposed, silent and crushing guilt began to tremble. His hands, which were resting on the arms of his chair, began to shake. His breath became a ragged, shallow thing. And then, for the first time in 15 years, he spoke of that night. "He was there," my father whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing, his eyes looking at a memory I could not see. "He was there. A dark sedan, no lights on. It came out of nowhere from the side road. It didn't stop. It just kept coming." He told us the whole terrible story. He told us how he had swerved to avoid the other car, how his own car had begun to hydroplane on the wet road. He told us about the impact, the sound of metal and glass. And he told us about the last thing he saw before he lost consciousness: the dark sedan with its single broken driver's side taillight speeding away into the rainy darkness without even slowing down. "Why?" I asked, my own voice a whisper. "Dad, why did you never tell anyone? Why did you let them blame you?" He looked at me then, his eyes, my eyes, swimming with the tears of a 15-year-old's shame. "Because," he choked out, "it didn't matter.
My son, your brother, he was gone, and I was the one behind the wheel. I was the father. It was my job to keep him safe, and I failed." He buried his face in his hands, and a sound I had not heard since I was a small child, a sound of such profound, broken despair, filled the silent room. He was weeping, weeping for his son, weeping for his failure, weeping for the 15 years of a silence that had cost him everything. Mr. Thompson, the man who had spent 15 years hating my father, did not say a word. He just stood up, walked over, and placed a quiet, steady hand on my father's shaking shoulder. It was a gesture of forgiveness, of understanding, of a shared and terrible peace. In that moment, the wall between my father and me, the thick, soundproof wall of unspoken grief and guilt, finally, blessedly began to crumble. The truth, which had been a ghost, a monster, was finally out in the open. We now had the story, a shared, consistent, and corroborated story from two fathers. But we still didn't have the truth. We didn't have the name of the man in the dark sedan, the true ghost of that rainy, terrible night.
But as I looked at the old faded police report again, at the name of the truck driver who had been the sole ignored witness, a new, cold, and deeply familiar resolve began to form in my heart. I was an archivist, a seeker of forgotten names, and I knew that somewhere in the deep, dusty, and forgotten corners of my own quiet archives, a final, crucial piece of this puzzle was waiting to be found, and I was going to be the one to find it. The weeks that followed were a quiet, obsessive blur of research. The city archives became our war room. Mr. Thompson, with his sharp investigator's mind, directed our search. I, with my intimate knowledge of the city's forgotten records, was his field agent, and my father, Martin, was our primary source. His memory, once a prison, now a key, as he slowly and painfully began to recount the details of that night. The name of the truck driver from the buried police report was Henderson, but he had vanished years ago. We used old census records, property deeds, and voting registries, and we finally found him. An old, retired trucker living in a small town 3 states away. The 3 of us made the drive together. We found him in a small, tidy house with a well-tended garden. He was an old man now, his face a roadmap of a long life on the road. When we told him who we were and why we were there, a look of profound and deeply buried guilt washed over his face. "I never should have stayed quiet," he whispered, his voice a gravelly rasp. But the police captain, he was a powerful man. He told me they had it under control, that my statement would just complicate things. He made me feel like I was the one causing trouble. "We don't blame you," Mr. Thompson said, his voice gentle. "We just need to know what you saw." And then the trucker told us. He described the dark sedan, the broken taillight, the way it had sped away into the storm. "I didn't get the whole license plate," he said, shaking his head. "Just the first 3 letters, NXT. And I remember one other thing, a small sticker on the back window, the logo for a local construction company, Northwood Construction. It went out of business years ago, but I remembered the logo." It was the final crucial piece. Back at the archives, it took me less than an hour. I cross-referenced old DMV records with the business filings for Northwood Construction, and I found him, the owner of the company, a man who, in the year of the accident, had owned a dark blue sedan with the license plate NXT 488. A man with a history of drunk driving convictions that had been quietly expunged from his record by a powerful lawyer. A man who, it turned out, was the police captain's own brother-in-law. The truth, in all its ugly, corrupt detail, was finally ours. The resolution was not a dramatic courtroom showdown. The statute of limitations had long since passed. And besides, we were not looking for vengeance. We were looking for peace. The story ends on a quiet, cool, and clear October afternoon, the 15th anniversary of a day that was no longer just about loss. I am standing in a cemetery between two graves, my brother Owen's, and next to him, Alex Thompson's. His father had had his son's remains moved so they could rest side by side. I am not alone. Beside me stands my father, Martin. The wall of silence between us is gone, replaced by a new, quiet, and deeply profound understanding. And on his other side stands Mr. Thompson. The two old men, the two grieving fathers, are not adversaries anymore. They are friends.
My small, anonymous act of kindness had brought me the truth. It had brought a measure of peace to a good man who had been haunted for too long. And it had, after 15 long, silent, and heartbreaking years, finally given me my father back. And that was a gift I knew that was truly priceless. An absolutely incredible story of justice from beyond the grave, and a woman who turned her own pain into a powerful purpose. What do you think of the godmother's brilliant and final plan to deliver justice through her will? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Aurora's incredible story, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories of karma. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.